When repairing a cordless honeycomb shade, it is important that you always first remove the end caps. Be careful not to break any of the pins. You then want to figure out where the break on your cordless honeycomb is. Here we're going to lift up the fabric to try and determine where it has resistance and where the break is. Once the break has been identified, you will know if it is going to be the front or the back side. The back side, the side facing away from the front of the headrail, is always going to be the bottom up. You then want to carefully remove all the dust covers over the cradles to ensure that they don't break so that they can be put back into place later. Once those are removed, you are going to be able to pull on the cords to determine which one has the break. As you can see, it is our back right side on this shade. We'll then want to remove the motors. Careful when you remove the motors that you do not over torque them, causing them to break. You only need to remove the primary driving motor for the cord that is broken. On this one, since we only need it for the bottom, we're only going to remove it for the bottom up portion, and we're going to remove the rod. Once the rod is removed, we'll go ahead and remove our cradle. And here you can see that we have identified where the break is. Again, on this cord, it is on the right-hand side. You'll then want to remove the cradle and the roll from each other so that you're able to remove the cord. Now, what you can do if you know where the break is, you can use the cord to go ahead and line it up correctly to know how much cord to use. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to take it plus a little extra to ensure that it has proper sizing on it. It is important again to note that you do knot the end so that you can fit it into the cradle and you remove any excess on the cord. So there's a little groove in the cradle that knot will slide into, and you just want to make sure that it lines up to the previous one. Here we're going to be taking a little extra cord to ensure that it has a little overlap. Once we have cut the cord to the appropriate length, we'll go ahead and discard the extra cord, and we'll slide it into the cradle. It is important to note that you do not want a frayed end. So here, as there's a frayed end, what we'll do is we'll cut that off so that it can be slid through the cradle housing unit. It is imperative to note that when you're trying to install this, that it goes in just right. It should make a clicking sound once it's in. In this case, since it wasn't set correctly and the cord wasn't allowing it to rotate, what we're going to do is we're going to have to reset it so that the barrel can rotate freely inside of the cradle. Again, you want to be careful when doing this, as sometimes it's a tight fit. Once the drum is in the cradle, you'll be able to slide this in. Now, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove the bottom rail buttons first, prepping it with our threading needle. Making sure that we have it lined up correctly, which we do. And we're going to remove the bottom rail buttons. So you can see we just removed that. And that since we've already confirmed that the needle can go into the fabric because it's already lined up, we'll be able to slide it right back in. Then we'll slide the cord in through the needle. Once the cord is through the needle eyelet, we'll go ahead and pull it through. And we've now gotten the cord back through the fabric. We want to make sure that it lines up, and there's a little groove for the cradle that ensures that it goes underneath the other rod. You want to make sure that this is set correctly, or else your cradle will not set correctly in the headrail. You'll also want to remove the other button on the bottom so that the cradle can be reset. This allows you to test the cord lengths against one another to ensure that you put the proper amount of cord in, of course. Now what you'll notice is that the housing units are all back in there. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove the cord from the old button. And then we're going to want to singe the end of the new cord so that it's at a point. And then we'll take that point and slide it through the little eyelet on the bottom button. Once we get through that eyelet, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to knot it off so that it does not slide back through. This is where the shade actually raises from with the cord. Now that we're through the eyelet, we're going to go ahead and knot it off. Putting the knot as close to the end as possible. And now that we've knotted off, we'll cut off any excess of that cord. Now again, you can here check to see if you have the correct amount of cord by measuring it against the other cradle when they're both housed in the headrail. Now that we have both cradles set in the unit, what we want to do is we want to slide the rod that actually turns the cradles through the motor side first, then in through the first cradle, and then into the second cradle. Please note that there is a notch on the rod that allows it to slide. Once we've slid it in, what we want to do is we want to check to make sure that it allows rotation, and then we'll want to slide the rod out just a little bit so that we're able to turn the rods in the headrail. These rods determine which way the motor will operate. If it is operating in the front of the headrail, it turns toward the front. If it operates in the back, it turns toward the back. You will notice that when you're rotating it, that the cord will raise with it. It may not raise all the way. So you can see that the factory had left a little excess. In this case, it's about 3 inches of excess cord on the bottom. It is standard for the factory to leave anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of extra cord on the bottom. With these adjustable spools, adjust them at the bottom by twisting clockwise. We now want to attach the button. Now that we have gone ahead and successfully put both buttons on, what we want to do is we want to put the motor on. In order to get the motor on, you will twist it the same direction that you raise the cords on. In this case, since it's toward the back of the headrail, we're going to tilt the motor to the back. As you can see, we did a test there to see if it would unwind once we tilted it back, and it came back to us. You want to tilt the motors a total of 13 times to the back to ensure that they are properly charged. This is the default factory limit. Once the motor is charged, you will slide it back onto the headrail. You may have to use some pliers to adjust the rod since it doesn't always agree with it, as there is a magnet that you may have to traverse over. Motor placement isn't important, although you want to make sure that it is not rubbing up against one of the cradles, so it's always best to put it halfway from a cradle to the end cap. You then want to test the shade to ensure that it raises and lowers. In this case, we tested both the top down and bottom up function. Even though we only did the bottom up repair, it works perfectly. We did notice that it is slightly askew. We're going to adjust the bottom rail by tightening the button on the bottom. It's best to do this, though, once the shade is in the customer's window, just so that you can ensure that it is level in their home. Now that we've tested it and confirmed that it's level, what we're going to do is we're going to put back on the dust cover cradles. These guys can be a little tricky to get in as they are a harder plastic, so they tend not to be very malleable. They will generally click into place as well once they're on correctly. You want to make sure, as there is a little tab on them, that it goes over everything and does not go underneath it and interfere with the cradle. You can also use pliers on this. Lucy here will be using pliers as well to try and help her get a better leverage on them. So we just have the one dust cover left. And now that that guy's on, what we'll do is we will go ahead and confirm that everything is on correctly. Make sure the rods are all set and put the end caps on. Please make sure that the rods are not rubbing the end caps. That is an important feature to make sure you take note of. And once the end caps are on, if anything popped out when you were putting them on, you want to go ahead and slide it back in. Make sure it's set correctly. As that one was clipping up underneath, Lucy's going to go ahead here and reset it. And we'll do one final test once the dust cover is on to ensure that everything is operating as it should and the shade operates perfectly.